In Warhammer 40k, when a space marine is too broken to fight but too valuable to let die, they get entombed in a dreadnought, a walking coffin. Their shattered body is wired into a war machine, and they spend eternity drifting between dormancy and combat. Most pilots slowly lose their minds from the isolation, but there's one variant where losing your mind isn't an option, because the warp won't let you. Librarian Dreadnought. The Librarian Dreadnought is the only variant that requires its pilot to maintain active psychic attunement while entombed. Every other Dreadnought pilot gets to drift. This one has to think harder than when they were alive. The Force Halberd hits at strength 10 with AP -4, functioning as a direct psychic conduit between the pilot's mind and whatever they're swinging at. Wings of Sanguinius grants 12 inches of fly movement and reroll charges, turning a lumbering metal coffin into a psychic missile. Quickening adds D3 extra attacks, meaning the pilot's willpower literally amplifies their combat output through warp manipulation. The real burden is cognitive. This pilot has to simultaneously manage psychic concentration, combat awareness, and the existential horror of being trapped in a box forever. Every other Dreadnought pilot gets the mercy of fading away. This one has to stay sharp, stay connected to a dimension that drives people insane, all while knowing their real body is a ruin plugged into a wall, which is, not ideal. But if you think the Librarian Dreadnought has it rough mentally, wait until you see what happens when you strip away the psychic powers entirely and just give a Dreadnought a really big gun. Ballistus Dreadnought. If the Librarian Dreadnought demands everything from the pilot's mind, the Ballistus demands almost nothing, and somehow that's worse. The Ballistus is a Redemptor platform variant engineered as self-propelled anti-tank artillery. Twin-linked Lascannons at strength 12, AP -3, dealing D6 +1 damage per hit. That's not suppressive fire. That's deleting vehicles from existence at extreme range. Here's where the design gets interesting. The Ballistus has an ability called Ballista Strike, granting rerolls against targets still above half health. This thing is built to be an opener. You hit fresh, undamaged targets first, not wounded ones limping away. At roughly 150 points in 10th edition, competitive players field these in pairs for overlapping fire lanes that can crack open anything on the board before it ever reaches your lines. But think about the pilot. Every other Dreadnought we've talked about has some form of direct engagement. The Ballistus pilot doesn't get that. They receive targeting data through range-finding systems, process firing solutions through artificial optics, and pull the trigger from half a battlefield away. They see everything they destroy. They just never feel the fight. That distance might sound like a mercy, but it creates its own horror. No adrenaline of the charge, no primal satisfaction of impact, just data, confirmation, reload. You're a sniper trapped in a metal coffin, watching kill feeds scroll past your consciousness forever, which is, not ideal. But if the Ballistus represents the cutting edge of ranged Dreadnought design, the Deredeo pattern proves this concept is far from new. Deredeo pattern. Now we enter Great Crusade territory and everything changes. The Deredeo pattern is a dedicated heavy support walker from the 30th millennium, and unlike every Dreadnought we've covered so far, this thing wants absolutely nothing to do with close combat. Zero melee weapons, zero interest in punching anything. It is a walking gun platform, and it is very good at its job. The Anvilus autocannon battery provides rapid fire output that shreds infantry formations before they can close distance. The Hellfire plasma cannonade handles the anti-tank work, rending through armor plating with sustained hits that generate additional impacts on critical rolls. You point it at something, and that something stops existing. Simple as that. But here's where the Deredeo gets genuinely unsettling, and it's not about firepower. A Deredeo pilot doesn't experience combat the way other Dreadnought pilots do. There's no visceral crunch of a power fist meeting Ceramite. Their entire existence is perception, calculating firing solutions, processing environmental data, making targeting decisions through artificial sensory systems that bear zero resemblance to natural vision. They see the battlefield through mathematics. And if any of these pilots are still alive in the 41st millennium, they carry a burden nobody else does. They remember the Great Crusade. They remember when the Imperium was expanding, when technology was advancing, when their own chassis was cutting edge rather than a relic nobody fully understands anymore. They've spent 10,000 years watching the Imperium slowly forget how to maintain their own body. That's not physical suffering. That's watching everything you knew become a myth, which is, not ideal. But at least the Deredeo pilot still has their mind intact. The next Dreadnought on our list can't say the same. Wolfen Dreadnought. Every Dreadnought pilot is fighting the machine. The cold, the isolation, the slow erosion of identity inside a metal coffin. But the Wolfen Dreadnought, the pilot isn't fighting the machine. The pilot is fighting themselves. This variant is exclusive to the Space Wolves, and the reason it exists is genuinely unsettling. Every Space Wolf carries something called the Canis Helix, a feral lupine mutation baked into their DNA that most warriors spend their entire lives suppressing. Some lose that fight. They devolve into wolfen, savage half-human predators driven by pure animal instinct. Now imagine one of those warriors gets mortally wounded and entombed inside a dreadnought. That's a wolfen dreadnought, a beast in a cage that also happens to be a walking tank. The loadout tells you everything. 0 range weapons, none. The entire armament is melee, a Fenrisian great axe and a great wolf claw, because whatever's left of the pilot has no interest in shooting anything. It puts out 6 melee attacks described as belligerent even by Space Wolves standards, which is saying something because Space Wolves already fight like they've got a personal grudge against the concept of restraint. Here's where it gets complicated. The Wolfen Dreadnought just narrates a +1 advance and charge aura for nearby units. That means the pilot retains some tactical awareness. Some fragment of the warrior is still in there, still coordinating, but the lore never confirms how much. The consciousness is split between decades of indoctrination, screaming duty to the Emperor, and the Canis Helix pulling toward pure feral aggression. Nobody knows which one is actually piloting during combat. This might be the only dreadnought where the pilot prefers the cage, but if you think an internal war between man and beast sounds bad, wait until you see what happens when the dreadnought itself is built for rage. Brutalist Dreadnought. Up until now, every dreadnought we've covered has been designed to support from a distance. The Brutalist doesn't do that. The Brutalist was built to sprint across the battlefield and tear things apart with its bare hands, and then die doing it. Here's the thing, the Brutalis is a melee specialized variant of the Redemptor chassis, which means it inherits the same fatal design flaw. The Redemptor platform burns out its pilot through operation, but the Brutalis cranks that problem to 11 because close combat demands more from the system than sitting back and shooting ever could. Every charge, every swing, every impact is actively shortening the life of the warrior inside. The loadout reflects exactly what this thing is for. Brutalist talons or fists with wrist-mounted twin-link bolt rifles for close quarters, and carapace-mounted heavy bolters or multi-meltas depending on whether you want to shred infantry or melt tanks on the way in. But the real nightmare is the Brutalis charge. On a charge roll of 2 through 6, this thing inflicts anywhere from D3 to D3 plus 3 mortal wounds before melee combat even begins. You're taking casualties just from it arriving, and the pilot knows all this. Every engagement is burning through what's left of their body. There's no centuries of stasis between battles. There's no long sleep. There's just the next fight and the biological cost of surviving it. Why would you pull back? You're already fuel. Every battle is either the glorious last stand or the warm-up for the glorious last stand. That kind of liberation makes a warrior dangerous in ways that self-preservation never could. But if the Brutalis is what happens when you push the Redemptor chassis toward melee, wait until you see what the base model does when it's firing on all cylinders. Redemptor Dreadnought. This is the biggest dreadnought the Space Marines have ever fielded. And somehow, that's the least interesting thing about it. The Redemptor was built from the ground up for Primaris Marines. Hyper-dense plasma reactors, sophisticated fiber bundles, neural links so advanced the pilot can move this thing with surprising dexterity despite being, a torso in a box. It's taller, broader, and meaner than anything that came before it. The primary arm mounts either a heavy onslaught Gatling cannon or a macro plasma incinerator, which harnesses the heat of captive suns to melt tanks into bubbling sludge. The other arm carries a Redemptor fist dealing D3 plus 3 damage, twin Fragstorm grenade launchers in the chest, and an Icarus rocket pod up top for anything stupid enough to fly nearby. 13 wounds, toughness 7, a 2+ save, and duty eternal shaving a point off every hit. On paper, it's the perfect war machine, but here's where it gets complicated. Those superior neural links that give the pilot all that speed and precision, they also make the pilot more aware, more conscious of every microsecond delay between intention and action. Older dreadnoughts had clunkier systems, which in a sick way was a mercy. The Redemptor sharpened perception instead of dulling it. They built a more comfortable cage and then gave the prisoner better eyesight to see the bars. And Primaris pilots had centuries of potential service ahead of them. A traditional Marine might have had 50 good years left. A Primaris, hundreds. All of it gone, replaced by an existence inside a reactor-powered coffin that lets you feel exactly how artificial your new life is. Better technology, same horror, arguably worse. But if the Redemptor represents the cutting edge, let's rewind to the pattern it was built to replace. Castroferum pattern. This is the one you've seen 1,000 times. The boxy silhouette, the power fist, the missile launcher bolted to the top like an afterthought. The Castroferum pattern is officially the most common dreadnought in the entire 41st millennium, and the Mars pattern Mark IV and Mark V variants are the ones doing the heavy lifting across virtually every Space Marine chapter in existence. This is the workhorse, the one they put you in when you're too broken to fight and too valuable to bury. Standard loadout pairs an assault cannon or twin-linked cannon on one arm with a power fist on the other, usually packing a storm bolter or a heavy flamer underneath, plus a missile launcher on the chassis for good measure. It's not flashy, it's effective, and it excels in exactly the kind of nightmare scenarios you'd expect from a compact walker. Starship boarding actions, tunnel fights, hive city clearances. Anywhere a Leviathan would get stuck in a doorframe, the Castroferum thrives. Here's the thing nobody really sits with though. The pilot is neurally linked directly into the cybernetic systems. They feel the walker like it's their own body. Every step, every impact, every round pinging off the ceramite. And they're sealed inside permanently. Not until they recover, not until the war ends, until they are destroyed. That's the deal. Only a Space Marine can handle it. The transhuman physiology and mental conditioning are required just to keep the neural link from frying the pilot's brain. The Ironclad variant pushes this further, basically a Castroferum that decided armor was more important than peripheral vision. Tens of thousands of warriors have been entombed in these things across 10,000 years. An endless chain of broken bodies, each one sealed into the same box their predecessor died in. But if the Castroferum represents the standard Dreadnought experience, some pilots have endured that experience for so long they've become something else entirely. Venerable Dreadnought, imagine waking up and everything you ever knew is worse. Not a little worse. Fundamentally, irreversibly worse. Now imagine that happening every single time you wake up for 10,000 years. That's the life of a venerable Dreadnought pilot. These are among the oldest war machines still fighting in the 41st millennium. Each one is a walking relic, a chapter treasure only roused from stasis when the situation is truly desperate. And the reason they're so valuable isn't just the firepower, it's what's inside the pilot's head. Centuries of battlefield experience. Direct memories of wars that modern Space Marines only read about in dusty texts they barely understand. Some of these pilots fought during the Horus Heresy, 10,000 years ago. They were there when the Emperor still walked among humanity, when Imperial technology actually worked the way it was supposed to. Those pilots remember all of it, and then they wake up and it's gone. Every time they're roused from dormancy, the Imperium has slid a little further. Technology is forgotten, knowledge lost. The pilot remembers a galaxy of expansion and ambition, and they open their sensors to a galaxy of decay and superstition. They can't die. They just get put back to sleep and woken up to find things have gotten worse again, which is, not ideal. Here's the thing nobody talks about. The life support systems keeping these ancient warriors alive have been patched and rebuilt so many times that they're barely recognizable. Components from different eras, different forge worlds, all jury-rigged together into hybrid systems that function according to zero original specifications. The machine keeping you alive is basically a ship of Theseus held together with prayers and duct tape. But the physical degradation might not even be the worst part. Knowing what was lost, what future generations will never possess, while you remain unchanged inside your metal coffin. That's not just being a prisoner of war. You're a prisoner of time. But if the venerable Dreadnought represents what happens when ancient technology barely survives, wait until you see what it looked like when that technology was brand new. Contemptor pattern. This is the one that makes the entire Imperium look bad. The Contemptor pattern. Dreadnought was the standard engine of the Great Crusade era, and it is objectively, measurably superior to every Dreadnought pattern that came after it. Faster, stronger, better protected, and nobody alive knows how to build a new one. Here's the thing, the Contemptor fuses traditional technologies with arcane cybernetic lore that the modern Imperium has completely lost. It's powered by an adamantic reactor that grants it speed and in strength beyond anything a Castroferum can dream of, plus defensive energy fields that make it significantly harder to kill. Multi-Meltas, twin-linked autocannons, plasma cannons, Karis assault cannons, twin-linked cannons, heavy conversion beamers, chain fists with built-in twin-linked bolters. The weapon options alone read like a shopping list from a civilization that actually had its act together. But here's where it gets dark. That adamantic shielding? If it takes catastrophic damage, the reactor doesn't just fail. It detonates. A miniature atomic explosion right there on the battlefield, vaporizing anyone standing too close, including allies. The very technology that makes the Contemptor superior also makes it a walking bomb, which is, not ideal. The Blood Angels fielded massive numbers of these things during the late Great Crusade, optimized for close assault because of course they were. Very few survived the Horus Heresy. The ones that did carry something no other warrior in the Imperium possesses. Two completely separate sets of memories. Pre-heresy, when humanity believed in infinite progress and galactic expansion. Post-heresy, when everything fell apart and never recovered. These pilots wake up periodically across 10,000 years, and every single time, fewer people understand how their own body works. The Contemptor is a walking monument to everything humanity used to be, and will never be again. And that's tragic enough on its own. But at least these pilots chose to serve the Emperor. The next entry on our list didn't get a choice at all. Hellbrute. So every Dreadnought we've talked about so far has one thing in common. The machine is trying to keep the pilot alive. The life support systems, the stasis protocols, the neural links, all of it exists to preserve whatever's left of the warrior warrior inside. The Hellbrute does the opposite. The Hellbrute is actively trying to make its pilot suffer. Here's the thing, a Hellbrute is what happens when a Chaos Space Marine gets entombed in a Dreadnought shell that's been marinating in warp corruption for 10,000 years. The internal machinery isn't life support. It's a parasitic tormentor. The systems flood the pilot with constant agony and nightmares, and the machine literally feeds on that suffering to empower itself. The worse the pilot feels, the stronger the Hellbrute gets, which is, not ideal. And it gets worse. Between battles, the pilot gets ripped out of the sarcophagus entirely, and the empty shell gets chained up like a rabid animal. Because even without a pilot inside, there's enough residual warp consciousness, it will fuse to the machine spirit that it might start causing problems on its own. So when it's time for the next fight, they unchain it, shove a screaming Marine back inside, and point it at the enemy. First wave, heavy shock assault, not expected to come back. That's the deployment doctrine. Destabilize and demoralize through sheer unpredictable violence. No tactical coordination, no extraction plan. Just a hurricane of anger and madness and flesh-cursed steel pointed vaguely toward the people you want dead. But here's where it gets really grim. As the heresy dragged on and original Dreadnought chassis started falling apart, the Dark Mechanicum stopped caring about who went inside. No more honored warriors earning a second life. They just grabbed any trained Marine they could find and forced them into increasingly unstable shells. The honor of interment gone, replaced with a production line of suffering. Every loyalist Dreadnought is a prison. The Hellbrute is a prison that hates you. But if the Hellbrute represents what happens when Dreadnought technology falls into the worst possible hands, the Leviathan pattern represents what happens when the Emperor himself gets involved in the design process. Leviathan pattern. Most Dreadnoughts are built to preserve a warrior. The Leviathan was built to spend one. This thing was produced in extremely limited numbers during the final years of the Great Crusade, and the circumstances of its creation are unlike anything else in the Imperial arsenal. The Leviathan was allegedly developed in secret on Terra itself, kept deliberately away from the Mechanicum's prying eyes. The rumors say the Emperor personally oversaw its development, incorporating hybridized technologies from the Age of Strife, components so old they predate the Imperium entirely. Some of those components were allegedly crafted by the Emperor's own hand. So we're not talking about a Dreadnought, we're talking about a divine relic that happens to have a person inside it. The frame towers over every other pattern we've discussed. Its oversized adamantic reactor generates enough power to fuel weapons that would tear lesser chassis apart, storm cannon arrays, grav flux bombards, cyclonic meltalances, siege drills with integrated meltaguns, and up to 3 hunter-killer missiles strapped to the top for good measure. The energy fields it projects surpass even Contemptor-grade shielding. The Leviathan looked at the gold standard and said, "That's cute." But here's where it gets dark. All that power has to go somewhere, and where it goes is through the pilot. The Leviathan systems place an ultimately lethal strain on its occupant. The warrior inside burns brightly but briefly, experiencing accelerated degradation that ensures they will never endure millennia like a venerable Dreadnought. They won't see centuries. They might not see decades. The Imperium made a conscious decision. They traded longevity for godlike destructive output. The pilot isn't a preserved hero anymore. They're a consumable component in a divine engine, and everybody involved knows it. Every battle could be their last because the machine itself is killing them faster than any enemy could. That's the Leviathan's confession. Some weapons are simply too powerful for the bodies inside them. But if you think the Leviathan sits at the top of the food chain, wait until you see what happens when the Custodes build their own version. Telemon Heavy Dreadnought. Every Dreadnought we've covered so far has one thing in common. The warrior inside used to be a space marine. The Telemon is different. The warrior inside used to be a custodian guard, and that distinction changes everything. The Adeptus Custodes are the 10,000, the Emperor's personal bodyguards, each one genetically engineered beyond anything the Space Marine program ever produced. A single custodian is worth dozens of Astartes in combat. They train for centuries under the direct oversight of the Emperor's own servants. They don't fight in squads because they need to. They fight alone because they can. Full stop. And then one of them gets hurt badly enough to be entombed. The Telemon Heavy Dreadnought is what they get. And on paper, it's absurd. Iliastus Accelerator Culverins hitting at strength 9, AP -1, damage 3. Twin plasma projectors running torrent and twin linked at strength 7. An Arachnus Storm Cannon putting out 12 attacks with devastating wounds at BS 2+. Feel no pain on a 5+. 5 melee attacks just from the armored feet. This thing is, by every measurable standard, the most powerful Dreadnought chassis in the Imperium. But here's the thing nobody talks about. The Custodian inside had centuries of active service before their injury. Centuries of being the single most dangerous thing on any battlefield they walked onto. They could read combat the way a musician reads sheet music. Every movement, every angle, every micro decision happening faster and more precisely than any Space Marine could dream of. That was their life. That was who they were. Now they're in a box. The Telemon can level fortifications positions, shred tank columns, and walk through entire squads without slowing down, but it still can't do what the custodian used to do with their own two hands. The reflexes are slower. The awareness is filtered through sensors instead of lived through flesh. The grace is gone. What remains is power without precision, strength without elegance. The most powerful prison in the galaxy is still a prison. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.